Over 70 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces this morning. If this were any other country, any other group of people, then this would have been a once in a lifetime tragedy that people would still remember decades later. It would be the front of the headlines for weeks, months, perhaps years. But because it's Palestine, this headline is the same as yesterday's headline, the same as last week's headline, the same as last month's headline, and on and on. And unfortunately, it's likely to be tomorrow's headline and the next day's headline and so forth. Um, some days I check the news and it says 115 Palestinians killed today in this or that Zionist airstrike. Other days, 30 killed at this school, 40 killed at this refugee camp that's supposed to be declared in a safe zone, 20 or so in this or that hospital, this or that mosque. And it's constant, like constant, once in a lifetime tragedies happening daily. And even people who actually care grow numb to it. Like, these are human lives, but they're treated in such a disposable fashion because their mass murder is expected. And these casualties are civilian casualties. The people who are being killed are largely children, and they're being killed in very violent ways. There's disease spreading, there's starvation being used as a weapon of war, the torture and the sexual assaults that happening in prisons, the military detentions of doctors and people who have no business being in a prison. None of the people of Palestine have business being detained, of course, by their oppressors, but it's just that this genocide has worn on for so long that we don't feel anymore the numbers when we hear them. They're so insane and so constant. And everyone's reaction, because we've become accustomed to Palestinian lives being disposable, even people who care, their reaction has become offensively mild. So, what do we do when we live in a timeline where the murder, the ethnic cleansing of a certain race of people stops being newsworthy? Meaning their rights to life no longer registers as more than a blip in the constant narrative of society. And the rest of the world goes on, and they all have entitlement to fundamental rights, but Palestine is an exception. And the societies carry on striving toward their goals, attempting to build better futures, dealing with their different problems as they come. And meanwhile, in the background, there's just this horrific, constant violation, and it keeps becoming more evil. Violations in more fundamental, never before seen ways, all combined at the same time. And when I say that our reactions have become offensively mild, I'm talking about myself as well. Like, I will check the news after a long day for 5 minutes because that's all I can take before I break down. But just enough to keep Palestine in my at the forefront of my ad'iyah, my prayers, and to keep being an effective activist, inshallah. But every news item that I receive is groundbreaking, and the human brain is not built to handle it. Like, just to live daily through once in a lifetime tragedies, we can't constantly be on that, living in that place of extremes, but it's an extreme time. So it's just the tragedy level is so high and so frequent that the bar has been moved. And it's like, for example, if I saw a news item that a whole bunch of civilians were killed and we were not living in a time of genocide, I would probably drop everything and write about that news item and make videos about that news item and, do what I can and focus on that. But because it's a daily thing, most times when I see the news that dozens of Palestinians have been killed, as I have been doing daily for 10 months now, I just read it and say a prayer and have a cry and I move on. And it's just become part of my daily routine. And I get to move on and they don't get to move on. And it's like some people say, why is everyone talking about Palestine all the time? There's other problems in the world. I actually think we're not talking about Palestine enough, given the extent of the transgression and the fact that we are funding it. The United States government is funding it, is using the stolen taxpayer money without the people's consent, against the overwhelming majority's wishes, to continue to fund this genocide. And they, even the consent they do get is manufactured. They lie, they create their own reality, and that's why those portions of the population consent. If they knew what was really going on, they would never be on board with this. I don't believe that your average American citizen is truly that evil to want the murder of children. But for people to say, why are we always talking about Palestine? My question is, why aren't we talking about Palestine more often? And the answer is because we've gotten used to it. We've gotten used to genocide. Every day, new families wiped off the face of the earth, and it's just normal in 2024, at least in Palestine. That's to be expected. It's our energy can't, like living on that extreme mode that I mentioned. Um, it's hard to sustain that in the long term, but it's necessary as long as Israel will sustain their assault on humanity for that long. The Western Empire is clawing at everyone's face as they fall. Empires don't live longer than a few centuries. The Western Empire is clearly expiring. The jig is up for colonialism, but they won't go down without a fight. We are currently in that phase of seeing this dying entity that is more evil than any entity that came before it, to my imagination or knowledge. And while we live in this timeline and continue to be surrounded by people who are so naively buying into the system, getting distracted by the talk of the elections, being told that if they don't choose the lesser of two evils, it's their fault, victim blaming essentially. If they don't vote for a war criminal who presents a prettier package than the other war criminal, then it's their fault. Anything bad that happens to them is their fault for not participating in this evil system. And when we are in that situation, it can feel extremely helpless. Um, People are constantly, because we live in a timeline where genocide has been normalized, um, that means that to be diplomatic is expected of us toward our oppressors. Things that would normally never be expected, like why should we have to make concessions? Why should we have to go into diplomatic talks? Why should we have a respectful way of phrasing things toward mass murderers? But because we are living at the mercy of the oppressors, even here in the United States, really, um, we aren't free. We just are privileged compared to Palestine, but certainly not free. And Palestine has really exposed that to a lot of people, I think. Um, so here we are in this situation where uh, we say offensively mild things. We say offensively mild things about Palestine, like, please ask your local war criminal governor or senator to sign this or that petition. And it feels so like this is such an insufficient response to constant genocide that our money is funding. And the way it's worded, like, dear Mr. War Criminal, dear Mr. Fill in the name of whatever war criminal you want, like, still giving respectful titles to people who fund the murder of children. Shouldn't we live in a society where if someone is mass murdering children, they lose their rights? They are the ones who should no longer have any place in society whatsoever, like they've forfeited, that's it. Yet here we are, and here we are negotiating with them. Here we are being interested in what they have to say or trying to appease them, buying into this system that's on our necks and doing it all for Palestine. Like, if you look at just this tiny, tiny segment of the population who cares about Palestine, they go through the system, they beg the system, they work with the system, and they celebrate when the system throws them crumbs. And every reaction, every phrasing, and every deed these days just comes across as so offensively mild. No response is enough. And again, I say it of myself as well, and it's like, what can we do? We can only continue because it's not in our hands. We are at the mercy of Allah. He's the one who is bearing witness to what is happening, and he's the one who has the plan that is unfolding with a perspective that we could not envision, except in we can only capture a fraction of the understanding of his plan in retrospect, even just with the factor of time. So, and I think here's part of the problem. We tend to categorize things very neatly in our brain to make sense of them. And for us, Palestine is like one box, right? So there could be, let's say, if there was like in the United States, a school shooting, like a very tragic incident happened, and it would bring up a whole bunch of debate about, as it always does, debate about gun control versus gun rights, and um, the violence in the country and all these different causes and things, and like the lives of the victims and the experiences of the survivors. That shooting, that single incident would have a calendar date that's acknowledged by everyone, and it would be put in its own dedicated box. Like, this is something worth talking about. Because Palestine is a bunch of tragedies on a scale even larger, each of which is on the scale even larger than a tragedy in the United States that might happen. It's like, imagine a million school shootings with a bunch of decades of systemic oppression and colonialism and Western imperialism tied in, happening daily. And all of that is getting squished into one box called Palestine. And so it's like, oh, why are we still talking about Palestine? Or why are we always just focusing on Palestine? What about this and this and this? And actually, every day in Palestine, a new tragedy occurs. So a new round of conversations should be happening, but it's not. We're treating it like the same one box. We should be making a bunch of new boxes. The day that this horrific attack happened in Khan Yunis. Of course, there's many, many days that horrific attacks happen in Khan Yunis, but just to give an example, the day that this happened in Rafah, again, a bunch of things happened in Rafah on a bunch of days. They keep striking. The Gaza Strip is pretty small, they very concentrated. They keep bombing the same areas. They don't have much to work with. They just repeatedly love to bomb children's schools again and again and again. And each time they do, it's like, oh, we're seeing the same names of the same places and the same type of crime. So it's like we've seen it. But no, this is happening like today, August 24, right? This is a new one, even though it looks like the same one and it looks like it should be categorized in the same box. Our reaction should be fresh because it's fresh for the people of Palestine. Like, when people die in Palestine, that's new people dying, right? and new people keep dying. But for us, we make the concept so abstract in our minds that it feels like more of the same reality that we have become accustomed to. But for hundreds and thousands of people in Palestine every single day, it's not more of the same. Their reality is constantly horrific and constantly changing to become increasingly horrific. And so, having said all that, just the fact that the word genocide, it's like one word and it's so easy to put in this box. Just think of it as what is the appropriate reaction and scale of reaction if we were to have daily school shootings here in the United States that happened in the same place constantly. Like, that's why I don't think we're actually talking about Palestine enough. And I'm constantly aware of it. And I know that all of us have limited energy, limited time. And we, like, we do what we can. But I also want to acknowledge that what we do is offensively mild. And the way we speak about Palestine is too often offensively mild. And we can't let this go. We can't allow our media nor our own minds, in an effort to make sense of what's happening, normalize any part of it. And of course, we should also talk about other tragedies outside of Palestine. It's important to be made aware of what's happening in Sudan and Congo. Those are usually the first two people bring up. Right now, Bangladesh. A lot of turmoil all over the world constantly. All of it highly connected to the Zionist project, by the way. Um, and I have many speeches, some of which are uploaded on this channel, about what the Masalit people are going through, the Rapid Support Forces, and how a lot of the horrific ethnic cleansings going on around the world are interconnected to that common thread of Western imperialism and Zionism. But even now, I recognize, like, I just used offensively mild language in this video when I said we should be made aware of these issues. We shouldn't just be aware of them. We should be fighting them. We should be spreading the awareness to others and dedicating our time to vanquishing this evil. And it's not to say that we shouldn't focus on, local problems or global problems aside from Palestine. It's really more the point being, I think our intensity should be maintained despite the understandable fatigue that we feel, where we acknowledge that every day brings a new war crime, a new Zionist war crime committed in Palestine every single day. So every day we talk about Palestine, it's a brand new war crime that we are talking about, in the context of all of the ones that came before it. So really, it's more about maintaining that intensity and avoiding the offensively mild tone. That's what really gets to me, the tone people use sometimes when they talk about Palestine, like almost apologetic, the both sidesism and all of this, um, because they're trying to collaborate with or gain the approval of liberals who, for them, genocide and imperialism aren't deal breakers. It's like that, those are not people worth winning over. If genocide isn't a deal breaker to you, then you're the one who needs to be brought up to speed. You're the one who needs to show the rest of the world that you do actually care about human rights. You're the one with the non pro human behavior, right? And I know this video is pretty much stream of consciousness. I really, my call to action is just to keep up the intensity and recognize that this situation is so extreme. We shouldn't become accustomed to the extremeness. And yes, it's unusual for us to constantly be in a state of extreme emotion and extreme words, but the situation is extreme and it calls for those very heavy topics to be addressed constantly. And that means we are all going to be feeling a lot more anger and sadness and guilt and trauma than we normally do, and all of that being a fraction of what the people of Palestine feel. If it helps us maintain the appropriate, non insulting level of intensity that actually honors the magnitude of the transgressions against humanity, against God's laws that we are seeing every day, um, we need to remember that this situation won't last forever. The genocide won't last forever. And yes, Israel won't last forever. So, although staying at that extreme intense level of being in constant grief of constant new mass murders is a tall order for anyone, um, among the people who are living in peace, like me here in the United States, let alone the tall order of the people of Palestine who are being tested most of all, of course, to actually live through the genocide. Um, we need to remember that it won't always be this way. We are in a test. And yes, the test has grown long. We have grown weary. Um, 75, 76 years, though, of occupation. Like right now, it's the most intense time that we can remember. But the test has been the entire lifetimes for the people of Palestine. And for us to remember that it won't always be this way. It's not normal to be living through a genocide. It has simply become normal to us. And remembering that there will be an end can motivate us to bring about that end sooner by not being offensively mild, not having the insulting reactions of Palestine being one of many little issues that has grown stale for us. And by continuing to use the intensity of speech that this evil warrants, we are so past the point of diplomacy and we are so past the point of intimidation. We're going to see this one through, inshallah. And again, it's not up to us. All we have to do is keep caring and keep showing up and keep praying and keep fighting. And we're being tested just as Palestine is being tested. And it's Allah who's carrying us through. Al Wadud, Al Rahman, Al Aziz, Al Qawid Intiqam. So that's my stream of consciousness reflection for the day. Jazakumullah khair. We'll keep up the fight, inshallah. Salam.